So we're getting ready to throw this back on. Got my gasket on the housing. Make sure you clean out these bolt holes, or at least inspect them so that there's not brake cleaner or something in there. If you join these housings and thread these bolts in and there's debris or brake cleaner in there, you can break that housing out because of the force of this bolt. Clean these up with some brake cleaner. Don't put anything on them. They're 5/16 grade 5 bolt. You should be able to torque it up to about 25, maybe to 28 foot-pounds. One other thing, so these two shafts right there go through these two holes, and that's what your levers for your foot pedal and your PTO clutch go to. If these are leaking at all when you take this apart, this is a good time to knock these out and put in some new seals. Neither of these are leaking, so I'm just going to grease them up a little bit with some non-moly gun grease, just so it goes together easier. And we'll put it together and torque the housing up. So we've got the valve body bolted back together here. Bolts are all in. Now there's 3 rows of bolts: middle, bottom, top. And when you put this together, I would encourage you to start in the middle row, middle bolt. Work on the middle row, go to the bottom, then the top, or vice versa. But start in the middle, torque them, do the rest. Try to work from the middle out as best you can when you're doing something like this, and then go over it one more time with your torque wrench in the same order. That'll help you get the best possible torque on the gasket, and an even torque. So all we got left to do on this housing is throw this cover on with one bolt here. It goes on the top, and that bolt hole there. We'll throw that on, and then we can put new O-rings on these tubes. As you can see, they're different lengths. There's 3 that are the same length. One's a little longer, and one's got a squiggly deal in it. And so coming over here, I'm going to put them in the transmission first. The one over here on the right by the clutch, I don't know which clutch that is, if that's the PTO or the 2-speed, but that's where your goofy looking with the bend in it goes, and it bends back towards these others. And then as you can see, there's a step here. That's where your one that's a little bit longer than the other 3 go. It goes here, and then the other 3 that are the same length go in here. All the same O-rings as far as I can tell. And it's not a bad time to look in there at your planetary and see what the teeth are looking like. I don't know if you can tell a lot from here, but look at those. And then, yeah, go ahead and put these back in. Maybe grease those O-rings up a little bit on both ends. Put your tubes in. Clean up this gasket surface. I don't know if I would get crazy with a buffer, because you're going to put a lot in here and it's hard to cover. But I would take a knife and scrape this off and wipe it down as best you can with brake cleaner so you can seal up that housing well. And you should be ready to go together. So this is kind of what your tubes should look like before you go ahead and throw that valve body back on. That one with the bend in it is right there on the right, and it is a little lower than the one beside it. And if you look at your valve body, you'll notice the holes on it are the similar way. The one thing you want to make sure of, though, is that when you're done, before you throw this together, that all those tubes are sticking out the same length. You ought to be able to put your hand over them, and they should be flat across the front. And if you have one that's taller than the rest, then you need to look at that again and see what you did wrong. Now, getting this valve body out and in is kind of difficult, but not impossible. You've got to remove that line there that goes to the hydraulic pump, and there's also a line, this one here, that goes from the valve body back to the other housing there by the oil filter for the transmission. So these levers are what give me the most grief, but you can kind of hold them up and out of the way to get that housing into place. But just be careful how much dirt you knock around. I mean, try to wipe off or blow off everything with compressed air before you try to tackle this project. It'll help keep everything cleaner. So we've got the housing on. I did not have to completely remove this pressure line going up to the hydraulic pump. I think it would probably be easier if it was all the way off, but I was able to get the nut off, slide it all the way back, and this one here is just a compression deal. Loosen that and it slips into an O-ring, and you're able to take the one off over there, and that line will come out completely. So that's the deal with those two. The levers for the pedals I've got right here, and before I took these off I marked them because I wasn't sure what I was going to run into as far as getting them lined back up. So I did make a couple of marks on each one, and I labeled the one. And so your big clutch spring is going to be back here, and it hinges off this rod up top, and it comes down here and will hook into that lever. So that goes back there. And so these shafts, you know, you don't have to worry about them falling into the transmission, and I didn't know that before I took it apart, so that's why I marked it. So they have roll pins, and not a real easy place to get them knocked out. I did use the air hammer to start them, but if you're like me and you can't ever find the right punch, I just took a 1/4 inch bolt, just a soft bolt, and once I had them started, I just used this bolt to tap with a hammer to tap out the roll pins to where they were almost all the way through. I left them still in the levers, but there you go. These then slid off the shafts pretty easily. There wasn't much rust on them. I did have to give them just a little tap with a hammer in to help, because what I did is I put a screwdriver behind it, between the lever and the housing, and then gave the shaft a little tap to help the lever pop out. And once I did that once or twice, they came right off. So I am going to put grease on each of the shafts. You could use anti-seize. I would use something to keep the moisture out of there, keep rust out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and put these both back on. And you have to remove those to get your rods off. So don't think because you can't get these off first that you're doing something wrong. You can't, they cannot, there's not enough room for them to come out without taking off those levers. So if you do that, you'll be able to get them off. And the rest of this is pretty straightforward. And also these outside housing bolts are 3/8 grade 5. When you put that back together, you can torque those up to 35 foot-pounds, or you know, if you're used to doing this for a living, you know what's tight enough. Just use the even torque all the way around. I didn't use anything on the gasket. Put it on dry. The only exception was I used a little bit of gasket cement in a few places to stick the gasket to that transmission housing so that it would stay in place while I got this housing on, and slipped over those pipes inside the transmission, those little couplers. And that was a little bit of a jockeying job. I kind of had to manipulate the housing a little bit, and finally was able to get it pushed onto them, and everything should be good. So that's what you need to know on this. So again, I don't claim to be an expert on these. I know some people that are really smart, and that helps me with these projects, but I'm just trying to pass this along to someone else who's trying to basically get through the same problem. It's not a very complicated system, but if you've never been around it, you're a little bit in the dark. So hopefully this helped out some folks that might be looking at the same issue. PTO is staying in like it should, gauging like it should. Clutch is operating normally, so this would be a successful repair. Should be good for another 40 years maybe.